In the quiet town of Oakhaven, nestled deep within a forgotten valley, life moved at the pace of the shifting shadows on the old brick buildings. It was a town where neighbors knew each other's names, where the biggest excitement was the Friday night high school football game. And at the edge of town, just off the old highway, stood Silas's Gas and Go. Silas, everyone just called him Silas, was a man easily overlooked. He was nearing 70, with a perpetual layer of grease on his hands from working on engines, a faded cap pulled low over his eyes, and a quiet way of speaking that made you lean in to hear him. He ran the gas station and a small repair shop attached to it, a relic of a time when full service wasn't a luxury. His days were filled with the mundane rhythm of pumping gas, checking oil, patching tires, and fixing sputtering engines. He lived simply in a small apartment above the garage. To most folks in Oakhaven, Silas was just the old man at the gas station. Kind, reliable, maybe a little weary. They saw the lines etched around his eyes, the slight stiffness in his movements first thing in the morning. They saw the faded paint and minor dents on his own vehicle parked out back, a beat-up, forest green Ford pickup truck from decades past, functional but far from flashy. What they couldn't see, was the stillness in his gaze when he watched the highway, the subtle tension held in his shoulders even when relaxed, the way his hands, calloused by work, moved with a precision that spoke of something far more complex than changing a spark plug. His past was a closed book in Oakhaven. He'd arrived maybe 20 years ago, a quiet stranger who bought the failing station and slowly nursed it back to life. He paid his taxes, helped stranded motorists, offered a word of advice or comfort when needed, and otherwise kept to himself. He was a fixture, a quiet part of the landscape, so ordinary he was practically invisible. This was exactly how Silas liked it. He had seen enough noise, enough chaos, enough blood and fire to last several lifetimes. Oakhaven was his peace, his quiet harbor. He wanted nothing more than to live out his days servicing cars and watching the sun set over the valley, undisturbed. The peace of Oakhaven, however, was about to be shattered. Like a dark cloud rolling in from the horizon, a new element entered the valley, bringing with it a storm of fear and disruption. They called themselves the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club. They weren't your typical weekend riders, these were organized criminals, their colors bearing grim insignias, their presence radiating menace. They started subtly at first. A few riders stopping at the local diner, making a point of taking up too much space, their loud laughter and rough language silencing the usual chatter. Then came the shakedowns, protection, money demanded from small businesses. Whispers of stolen goods, of intimidation tactics. Their numbers grew, their rides more frequent, their control tightening like a vice around the throat of the unsuspecting town. The local sheriff, Deputy Miller, was a good man, but he was only one person in a small office, outmatched and outgunned. The mayor seemed unwilling or unable to confront the problem, perhaps intimidated, perhaps something worse. Fear began to creep into Oakhaven, changing the rhythm of life from peaceful to wary. Locals avoided eye contact, locked their doors a little tighter at night. The Iron Vultures were a blight, a growing infection on the quiet community Silas had come to call home. Silas watched. He didn't intervene in the initial incidents he saw, a rider shoving a local aside on the sidewalk, a group of them loitering outside the hardware store, making customers uneasy. He observed, his eyes missing nothing. Their hierarchy, their habits, the routes they favored. He logged it all away in the deep recesses of his mind, a part of his brain that had been dormant for decades, now slowly, reluctantly, stirring. He hoped, with a fervent intensity he hadn't felt in years, that they would simply leave Oakhaven alone, that this phase would pass. But the Iron Vultures weren't in the business of passing phases. They were conquerors, petty tyrants who fed on fear and exploitation. And eventually, their path intersected directly with Silas's quiet corner of the world. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun beat down on the asphalt, shimmering above the highway. Silas was wiping down a customer's windshield, a teenager getting gas in his beat-up sedan. Suddenly, the air was filled with the deafening roar of engines. A group of about 10 motorcycles, heavy cruisers customized with chrome and black paint, pulled into the station. The lead bike, larger and louder than the others, bore a rider wearing patches that marked him as a high-ranking member, perhaps the leader. He was a large man, thick-necked, with a scowl etched into his face and cold, dismissive eyes. This was Hammer. The bikers dismounted, spreading out with an air of ownership. They sauntered around, kicking tires, making loud comments. One of them shouldered past the teenager, who flinched and backed away, abandoning his attempt to pay inside. "Hey, old man!" Hammer called out, his voice a gravelly boom. "Fill these up. And be quick about it." Silas finished the windshield, handing the rag back to the nervous teenager with a quiet word, "You're good to go, son." He walked slowly towards the lead bike, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Hammer watched him, a smirk playing on his lips. "What's the matter, Gramps?" another biker jeered. "Too slow. Need a walker." Silas ignored them, focusing on the gas pump. He inserted the nozzle into Hammer's tank. Hammer leaned back, crossing his arms. His eyes swept across the station, lingering on Silas's old pickup parked near the garage bay. He gestured towards it with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. "Look at that pile of junk," Hammer sneered, loud enough for his men to hear. They laughed. "Think that thing's seen better days? Probably smells like mothballs and regret." Another biker added, "Looks like it belongs in a junkyard, not a gas station." "Just like the owner." More laughter. Silas kept pumping the gas, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. His hands were steady. But the slight tightening around his eyes was visible if you knew where to look. He finished filling the tank, replaced the nozzle, and started towards the station door to run the card. Hammer blocked his path. "Not so fast, old man. My buddy here thinks that truck needs an adjustment." A biker with a malicious grin was walking towards Silas's pickup, holding a heavy wrench. He raised it, clearly intending to smash a headlight or a window. This was the line. Not the insults, not the demands, not even the intimidation of the teenager. It was the deliberate, pointless destruction. It was the assumption that because he was old and quiet, Silas had no right to anything, not even his beat-up old truck. It was the arrogance of pure, unchecked malice. A stillness fell over Silas. It wasn't the slowness they mocked. It was the stillness of perfect, absolute calm before a storm. "Don't," Silas said, his voice low, barely audible above the idling engines. But the sound cut through the air with the unexpected sharpness of broken glass. The biker with the wrench paused, turning back with a puzzled look. Hammer and his crew chuckled. "Did the old man say something?" Hammer taunted. "Sounded like a mouse squeaking." The biker grinned, raising the wrench higher, ready to strike the pickup's headlight. Silas moved. It wasn't fast in a blur of motion way, but it was impossibly quick in its economy and efficiency. One moment he was standing still, the next he was a fluid, devastating force. His right hand shot out, not at the biker with the wrench, but at the biker standing closest to him, an arrogant brute with his arms crossed. Silas didn't punch, he used an open palm, a blindingly fast strike just below the ribcage. The biker gasped, doubling over instantly, the air knocked from his lungs in a choked cough. Before anyone could fully register this, Silas pivoted. The biker with the wrench was swinging now, aiming for his head. Silas didn't duck or block in a conventional sense. He shifted his weight, letting the wrench swing past by a hair, simultaneously snapping his left hand up, not grabbing the wrench, but grabbing the wrist holding it. His grip was like steel. With a sharp, brutal twist, he leveraged the man's momentum and weight against him. A sickening crunch echoed across the asphalt. The biker cried out, dropping the wrench as his wrist broke. Two more bikers surged forward. Silas didn't engage them head-on. He used the injured biker as a shield, spinning him around, then shoving him hard into the path of one of his comrades, knocking them both off balance. The third attacker swung a wild punch. Silas easily sidestepped it, trapping the man's arm as he overextended. He didn't need brute strength. He used leverage, twisting the arm and applying pressure to a nerve cluster near the shoulder. The biker stiffened, a look of agony crossing his face, before Silas released him with a final shove that sent him stumbling back towards the pumps. It had taken perhaps 5 seconds. 4 of Hammer's men were incapacitated or reeling in pain. Silas stood perfectly still again, his chest rising and falling only slightly faster than normal, his expression still unreadable. Hammer and the remaining bikers were frozen, their smirks gone, replaced by stunned silence and wide eyes. They looked from their fallen comrades to the quiet old man who stood amidst the chaos he had just created. The air crackled with shock and disbelief. "What the hell?" Hammer roared, finally finding his voice. He looked at Silas with a mixture of fury and dawning comprehension. This wasn't just an old man. Silas met his gaze, his own eyes clear and steady. There was no anger there, only a deep, weary resolve. "I told you not to," he said, his voice still quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced even Hammer. Hammer's face contorted with rage. Humiliation burned in his eyes. He pulled a thick, ornate knife from his belt. The remaining bikers reached for weapons, chains, bats, knives. Silas didn't react visibly, but his stance subtly shifted, becoming more grounded, more balanced. He scanned the remaining threats, calculating angles, distances, potential movements. Then, the sound of an approaching engine, different from the rumble of motorcycles, cut through the tense air. It was a vehicle moving fast. A moment later, a sleek, black SUV, the kind you saw driven by government agents or security details, screeched to a halt just beyond the gas pumps. The doors flew open, and 2 men in crisp, dark suits and earpieces stepped out. Their movements were economical, efficient. They weren't police, they had a different bearing, an intensity that spoke of specialized training. They surveyed the scene, the downed bikers, Hammer with his knife, Silas standing calmly. "Mr. Silas," one of the men, a man with sharp eyes and a neutral expression, called out. His voice was calm but projected authority. Silas looked at the SUV, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, annoyance. Resignation. Hammer and his men were momentarily distracted, unsure what this new element was. Silas took advantage of the split second. He didn't address the men in the suits directly. He looked at Hammer. "Get out of here," Silas said, his voice losing the quiet tone and gaining a low, resonant depth that vibrated with power. "Take your wounded and leave. Don't come back." Hammer hesitated, torn between his bruised ego, the unexpected resistance from Silas, and the sudden arrival of the black SUV and its occupants. His eyes darted between Silas and the new arrivals. The men in suits hadn't drawn weapons, but their hands were visible and ready, their eyes scanning everything. The calculation was swift. They were outnumbered, surprised, and facing 2 unknown, potentially dangerous parties. Retreat was the only logical option, as much as it galled Hammer. "You think this is over, old man?" Hammer snarled, pointing the knife at Silas. "You made a mistake. You just made an enemy of the Iron Vultures. We're coming back, and next time. Next time, you won't leave at all," Silas finished calmly, his gaze unwavering. Hammer glared, then spat on the ground. "Mount up," he yelled at his men. The remaining conscious bikers scrambled back onto their bikes, helping their injured comrades onto the back seats or leaving the worst off sprawled on the ground. Hammer jumped onto his lead bike. With a final, hateful look at Silas, he gunned the engine. The group roared out of the station, leaving behind the stench of exhaust, fear, and the faint smell of spilled gasoline. 2 injured bikers were left behind, moaning on the ground. The 2 men from the SUV approached cautiously, their eyes still scanning the perimeter before focusing on Silas. "Are you all right, Mr. Silas?" the first man asked. He glanced at the downed bikers. Looks like you handled yourself. Silas knelt beside one of the injured bikers, checking his pulse and breathing with practiced ease. They'll live, he said, standing back up. He looked at the men. Agent Carter. Agent Davies. Didn't expect you this soon. Intel suggested Mr. Hammer and his group might make a move today, Agent Carter said smoothly. Your contact indicated you might require support. Silas sighed, running a hand over his face, leaving a new streak of grease on his forehead. Support? Or babysitting? Consider it, monitoring, Agent Davies said, his voice equally calm. Silas just nodded. He looked around the now quiet gas station, the pump standing silent witnesses, his old pickup unharmed. The peace he cherished felt fragile now, irrevocably broken. He had hoped his past life would never catch up to him here. But it seemed some things were impossible to outrun. The retreat of the Iron Vultures was swift and humiliating for them. They left behind 2 injured members at Silas's Gas and Go, who were quickly picked up by the county sheriff, alerted by Agent Carter. The deputies were surprised to find the bikers battered and subdued, not by a rival gang, but by the quiet old man who ran the gas station. Deputy Miller, arriving on the scene, exchanged a look with Silas, a look that held a dawning respect and understanding. He didn't ask questions about the men in suits, he knew instinctively that this went deeper than a simple brawl. Hammer returned to the Iron Vultures clubhouse on the outskirts of a nearby town, a derelict warehouse they had fortified. His face was a mask of furious indignation. 10 of his men against 1 old man, and they had been sent packing, leaving injured behind. The story spread quickly among the ranks, a mix of disbelief and reluctant awe at the crazy old-timer. He's not just an old man. Hammer roared, pacing in front of his lieutenants. His wrist was bandaged where Silas had twisted it. He's something else. He moves like he's fought before. Like he knows how to hurt people. His second in command, a man named Reaper, was quieter, smarter than Hammer but equally brutal. He watched Hammer's display with narrowed eyes. An old man who works on cars. Maybe he just got lucky. Or maybe he has backup. Backup? Hammer scoffed, then his eyes widened slightly as he remembered the black SUV and the men in suits. Who were they? Cops? They didn't act like cops. Didn't act like local cops, maybe, Reaper mused. An old man who can handle himself and seems to know guys in suits who show up just as things get rough. We need to find out who he is. And who he knows. Their initial defeat, instead of deterring the vultures, simply shifted their strategy and intensified their malice. Hammer's ego demanded retribution. He wouldn't just hurt Silas, he would hurt Oakhaven, the town Silas seemed to care about. He would make an example of them. Silas knew this was coming. The moment he reacted, he accepted that his quiet life was likely over. But he couldn't stand by and watch them destroy his home, the place that had given him peace. Agent Carter and Agent Davies stayed in Oakhaven, observing from a distance. They were part of a specialized unit, tracking the Iron Vultures for federal crimes related to trafficking and racketeering across state lines. Silas, it turned out, had a history with certain branches of the government, a history buried deep but not entirely forgotten. When intel hinted at the vultures targeting Oakhaven, an old contact had quietly reached out, asking if Silas was aware. Silas had been reluctant, but his refusal to be a victim, or to let Oakhaven become one, was stronger than his desire for anonymity. The agents were there, officially, to gather intelligence on the vultures' movements and connections. Unofficially, they were there because someone high up remembered Silas, remembered what he was capable of, and wanted to ensure he wasn't left alone against a threat he didn't have to face, but inevitably would. Silas didn't rely on them for the coming fight, not for the ground-level defense of Oakhaven. That was his burden. He began gathering information himself. He watched the vultures' movements more closely, noting the times they rode through town, the places they lingered, the people they interacted with. He used the quiet network of small-town life, conversations with truckers passing through, observations shared by wary locals, the hesitant reports from Deputy Miller. He confirmed Reaper's suspicions. The Vultures were more than just local thugs. They were moving drugs, possibly weapons, using Oakhaven as a potential hub or a transit point, drawn by its isolated location and the perceived weakness of its law enforcement. Their aggression wasn't just about intimidation, it was about clearing the way for more serious operations. The scale of the problem became clearer. The Vultures numbered perhaps 50 strong in the region, with connections to larger criminal networks further afield. Hammer and Reaper were the visible leaders, but there were others, enforcers, logistics men, those who handled the dirty work. Silas knew he couldn't face them alone, not the full force of the MC. He needed allies. Real allies, not just observers. He thought of the contacts Agent Carter had mentioned, the old world Silas had left behind. He hesitated. Bringing that world here, it felt like poisoning the peace he had found. But Oakhaven was already being poisoned. He made a few discreet calls. Old, encrypted satellite phone lines, dusty call signs, phrases that hadn't been spoken aloud in decades. He reached out to people who understood duty, sacrifice, and the kind of fight where the lines were blurred and the stakes were everything. The first to arrive wasn't from the government or the military. It was a woman named Mara. She pulled up to the gas station on a sleek, well-maintained motorcycle, not a cruiser like the Vultures' bikes, but a fast, agile machine. She was younger than Silas, maybe in her late 40s, early 50s, with sharp eyes, a lean, strong build, and an easy confidence. She wore worn leather, functional and unassuming. Tell us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. Silas, she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. Mara, he replied, a rare, small smile touching his lips. He hadn't seen her in 15 years. Heard you ran into some trouble, she said, glancing at the slightly battered pump where Silas had taken down the bikers. Something about an old man and a wrench? A flicker of amusement crossed her face. Silas just nodded. Mara was former intelligence, deep cover. Resourceful, adaptable, and fiercely loyal. She understood the kind of information gathering and planning needed for this kind of fight. Next came Daniel. He arrived in a nondescript sedan, blending in perfectly. Daniel was a quiet giant, powerful but gentle, with hands as capable of intricate repair work as they were of disabling an opponent. He'd been Silas's demolitions and heavy weapons expert, now ran a quiet welding business upstate. Then came the others, arriving separately over the next few days, blending into the background of Oakhaven as much as possible. Ben, the medic and surveillance specialist, posing as a traveling bird watcher. Clara, the communications and tech expert, setting up shop in a rented room with more antennas than luggage. And finally, Marcus, the natural leader, the voice of calm authority, a former liaison who could navigate complex situations, arriving seemingly on a fishing trip. They weren't a full unit, not the one Silas had commanded, but they were the core, the best of the best. They had all left the life, sought peace, but they answered Silas's call without hesitation. Duty bound them, but loyalty and respect fueled their willingness to return to the shadows. They set up a quiet command center in the apartment above the garage, using Silas's knowledge of the town and Mara's network to begin weaving their own web of information. Meanwhile, the Iron Vultures, smarting from their initial defeat, escalated their campaign of intimidation. They rode through town daily now, deliberately loud, harassing anyone who dared to look at them the wrong way. They trashed the local diner when the owner refused to pay them. They beat up a young man who tried to defend his sister from their leers. Fear was rampant. Deputy Miller did what he could, making arrests for minor offenses, but the Vultures were careful to stay just within the bounds of what his small force could handle, or they simply overwhelmed his deputies when they couldn't. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. They wanted Oakhaven to break, to accept their rule. Hammer, still enraged, was now obsessed with Silas. He put a bounty on the old man's head within his own club. He sent scouting parties to watch the gas station, looking for a weakness, an opportunity. He wanted Silas to suffer. One evening, under the cover of darkness, a small group of vultures attacked the gas station. They came prepared, not expecting an easy fight, but still underestimating who they were facing. They intended to firebomb the place, send a clear message. But Silas and his allies were ready. Daniel had rigged subtle, non-lethal deterrents around the perimeter, motion sensors triggering disorienting lights, sonic emitters designed to scatter attackers, tripwires that released clouds of harmless but noxious smoke. As the vultures approached the building, the gas station suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree gone mad, strobe lights flashing from hidden points. A high-pitched whine pierced the air, unbearable to the unprotected ear. Smoke billowed from the ground around them. Confusion and panic erupted. From the shadows, Silas, Mara, and Daniel moved like wraiths. They didn't engage with firearms. Using the chaos and the darkness, they moved among the disoriented bikers, incapacitating them quickly and silently with strikes, joint locks, and pressure points. Ben was positioned nearby, providing cover and observation, communicating through earpieces. Within minutes, the attack was neutralized. The vultures were left tied up and gagged, scattered around the perimeter of the gas station, thoroughly humiliated and terrified by the unseen force that had overwhelmed them. Deputy Miller arrived a short while later, alerted by a silent signal from Silas. He found the scene and simply nodded, his respect for Silas and his mysterious allies growing. He arrested the vultures, adding to the growing list of incarcerated members. This successful defense, however, only served to infuriate Hammer further. He realized Silas wasn't alone, that he had a trained crew helping him. The sight of his men being hauled away by the police, looking scared and defeated, was unbearable. Reaper cautioned him, suggesting they needed a better plan, more resources, perhaps contacting their superiors in the larger network they served. But Hammer was driven by primal rage and a need to reclaim his lost standing. He wants a war. Hammer snarled, slamming his fist down on a table at the clubhouse. He's got one. We hit them hard. We hit them everywhere. We show this town what happens when you mess with the Iron Vultures. His plan was simple, brutal, and designed to spread terror. They would launch coordinated attacks across Oakhaven, targeting key businesses that had defied them, public spaces, even homes. They would burn, they would destroy, they would hurt. Silas and his allies anticipated a strong reaction. Clara, monitoring chatter on various frequencies and digital channels, intercepted fragmented communications indicating a major move was imminent. Mara's network picked up unusual activity, vulture chapters from neighboring areas converging. They gathered in the apartment above the garage. Maps of Oakhaven were spread out on the table, marked with potential targets, vulture strongholds, likely routes. The air was tense, heavy with the knowledge that this was escalating rapidly towards a major confrontation. They're bringing in more numbers, Mara reported, pointing to a route on the map. Looks like reinforcements from the North Chapter. Maybe 20, 30 more riders. Hammer's making this personal, Marcus said, his voice calm, assessing. He wants to crush Oakhaven, break its spirit. Show everyone he's still in charge. We can't defend the whole town at once, Daniel rumbled, his brow furrowed. Not against that many. Silas listened, his gaze moving slowly across the map, his mind working through possibilities, calculating risks and probabilities. He wasn't just seeing streets and buildings, he was seeing lines of fire, points of vulnerability, choke points, avenues of retreat. The dormant tactical mind, honed by years in the crucible of war, was fully awake now. No, Silas said finally, his voice quiet but commanding attention. We don't defend everywhere. We choose the ground. We make them come to us. He outlined his plan. It wasn't about meeting force with equal force. It was about misdirection, about using the vulture's aggression and Hammer's predictable rage against them. It was about controlling the flow of the fight, forcing the vultures into situations where their numbers became a disadvantage and the allies' precision and knowledge of the terrain became decisive factors. The plan was audacious, risky, and relied on perfect timing and execution. It involved drawing the main vulture force into a specific part of town, one that offered tactical advantages for a smaller, highly skilled team. It required bait, traps, and coordinated movements across multiple points. It also required the cooperation of the very community they were fighting for. "We need the townspeople," Silas stated. "They have to be part of this. They need to show them they won't be broken. Not with violence, but with courage. With defiance." Mara looked skeptical. "Civilians? Silas, this is going to be dangerous. We can't guarantee their safety." "We can't win this without them," Silas countered. "This isn't just our fight. It's Oakhaven's. And they've already shown more courage than Hammer gives them credit for." Marcus nodded slowly. "He's right. We need to give them a way to contribute, a way to stand tall. Something that empowers them without putting them directly in the line of fire." They refined the plan, integrating ways the townspeople could help, subtle signals, blocking off streets in seemingly innocuous ways, providing safe havens, spreading misinformation that would reach vulture ears. Deputy Miller, brought into the loop by Marcus in a discreet meeting, agreed to coordinate the limited official response he could muster, focusing on containing the chaos and ensuring the safety of those not directly involved in the trap. As they finalized the details, Clara intercepted a communication, clearer this time, confirming the Iron Vultures' major move. Hammer was consolidating forces. He wasn't just sending raiding parties, he was planning a full-scale assault on the town, a terrifying display of power aimed at crushing every last bit of resistance and showing everyone who owned Oakhaven. Hammer's gathered his full strength, Clara reported, her voice grim. Estimated 50 to 60 riders. Plus the support crew, maybe 20 more. They're staging tonight. This was it. The point of no return. The stakes were higher than ever. The fate of Oakhaven, the safety of its people, rested on the shoulders of an old man, his small team of forgotten warriors, and the courage of a town that had found its voice. Marcus looked at Silas. "Are we ready?" Silas looked around at the faces of his allies, faces he had trusted with his life in darker places and darker times. They were ready. He looked out the window at the quiet street below, the unsuspecting town preparing for its evening. It was time. "We're ready," Silas said, his voice steady. "Let them come." The plan was set in motion like the intricate gears of a well-maintained engine. The night of the anticipated attack arrived, the air thick with unspoken tension. Oakhaven seemed quieter than usual, the streets deserted earlier than normal. But beneath the surface, there was movement, a quiet defiance. Townspeople who had agreed to help subtly altered traffic flow, leaving seemingly random obstructions that would channel vehicles toward specific routes. Old Mrs. Gable put out her laundry, a white sheet hung just so, a prearranged signal. The lights in certain houses blinked in coded patterns. Deputy Miller and his small team positioned themselves on the perimeter, ready to move when the time was right. The Iron Vultures, confident and arrogant, rode into Oakhaven expecting to find a cowering populace. Hammer was at the front, fueled by vengeance, eager to burn this town to the ground and wipe away the memory of his humiliation. They roared down the main highway, their numbers impressive, their intent clear. But as they entered the town proper, they found their usual paths blocked or subtly diverted. They were funneled, piece by piece, group by group, towards the area Silas had designated as the kill zone, an older industrial section of town, abandoned warehouses, narrow alleys, dead ends. "What's going on?" Hammer growled into his comms, seeing the unexpected detours. "Roadwork, maybe." Reaper replied, though he sounded uneasy. "Or maybe they're trying to block us in." "Doesn't matter," Hammer snarled. "We go through. Spread out. Find their hiding places. Burn it all. They split up, trying to regain control, becoming a scattered, less cohesive force. This was exactly what Silas wanted. The Allies were positioned throughout the industrial area, hidden in the shadows, on rooftops, behind barricades they had quietly erected. Mara was perched high, her motorcycle hidden, acting as an aerial observer and rapid response element. Daniel was positioned near a choke point, ready with non-lethal crowd control measures he had devised. Ben was covering a key intersection, eyes and ears everywhere. Clara was back at the gas station, monitoring all communications, jamming the Vultures' comms at critical moments, providing real-time updates. Marcus was coordinating movements on the ground, a calm voice guiding their actions. The first confrontation came when a group of Vultures, led by a brutal enforcer named Butcher, cornered Deputy Miller and two deputies in an alley. They intended to make a bloody statement. But as Butcher raised a crowbar, a figure dropped from a fire escape above. It was Silas. He landed silently behind Butcher, a blur of controlled motion. One hand clamped over the biker's mouth, stifling a yell. The other applied pressure to the base of the skull. Butcher went limp instantly, unconscious. Silas released him, letting him slump to the ground. He turned to face the stunned Vultures, who were momentarily paralyzed by the sudden, impossible appearance and takedown of their leader. "Leave them alone," Silas said, his voice a low growl. Before the Vultures could react, Ben appeared from a doorway, firing paintballs filled with a powerfully disorienting chemical agent. The Vultures screamed as the stinging, irritating liquid hit them, momentarily blinding them. Silas used the distraction to move, taking down two more with swift, brutal efficiency. Mara roared past on her bike, weaving through the chaos, scattering the remaining Vultures before they could regroup. Deputy Miller and his deputies, recovering from their shock, quickly moved in to secure the downed bikers. Similar skirmishes erupted across the trap zone. Daniel used sonic emitters and carefully placed smoke grenades to disorient larger groups, forcing them to abandon their bikes and funneling them into areas where Silas and the others could engage them on foot. Clara's jamming turned the Vultures' coordinated attack into a cacophony of frustrated shouts and broken communication. The Vultures were used to fighting opponents who were scared, disorganized, and predictable. They were not prepared for an enemy who knew their tactics, used the environment against them, and moved with the precision of trained operators. They were losing control, their aggression turning into panicked confusion. Hammer, realizing the assault wasn't going as planned, tried to rally his forces. He roared orders, but his men were scattered, disoriented, and finding themselves outfought at every turn by unseen or underestimated opponents. He saw Mara's bike weaving through the streets and cursed, recognizing the skilled riding wasn't just a random biker. He heard snippets of radio chatter from his men about phantoms and that old man. He finally understood. This wasn't random resistance. This was a planned operation. And the old man from the gas station was running it. Hammer's fury focused entirely on Silas. He abandoned his larger plan of terrorizing the town and instead gathered his most loyal remaining men, roaring, "Find the old man. Bring him to me. I'll show him what real power is." Silas anticipated this. He knew Hammer's ego wouldn't allow him to retreat again without confronting the source of his humiliation. Silas had subtly led the Vultures deeper into the industrial zone, closer to the final part of his trap. He moved towards the old abandoned mill, a large, decaying building overlooking the river at the edge of the zone. This was where he would face Hammer. His allies peeled off, continuing to disrupt and contain the remaining Vulture forces, ensuring Hammer's path to the mill was clear, but that he couldn't bring his entire army with him. Hammer arrived with about a dozen of his most heavily armed and loyal men. They dismounted, their bikes rumbling ominously in the silence of the decaying mill yard. The air here was cold, carrying the damp smell of the river and decay. "Silas!" Hammer roared, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "Show yourself, old man. Time to finish this." Silas stepped out from the deep shadow of the mill's entrance. He wasn't wearing his gas station uniform. He wore dark, practical clothing that seemed to melt into the night. He carried nothing in his hands, but his posture, the way he held himself, spoke volumes. "Hammer," Silas replied, his voice calm, carrying across the yard. "You shouldn't have come back." "Shouldn't have come back." Hammer laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You piece of trash. You think you can embarrass me and get away with it? You think your little games mean anything? I'm the Iron Vultures. We are power." "Power isn't given," Silas said. "It's earned. And you haven't earned anything but contempt." Hammer roared inarticulate rage. "Get him." His men advanced, spreading out, moving with the crude, aggressive tactics of street fighters and bullies. Silas didn't wait for them. He moved into the mill itself, a labyrinth of decaying machinery, narrow walkways, and dark corners. Hammer and his men pursued him. The mill became the arena for the final confrontation. It wasn't a straight-up brawl. It was a hunt. Silas, using his intimate knowledge of urban warfare and close-quarters combat, turned the environment into his weapon. He moved silently through the darkness, drawing the vultures deeper in, separating them. A biker rounded a corner, expecting to find Silas. Instead, he found an old piece of pipe swinging down from above, striking him in the head and knocking him out cold. Another stepped onto a weakened section of floor, only for it to give way, sending him tumbling into the shallow, murky water below. Silas was a ghost in the mill, appearing and disappearing, striking hard and fast from unexpected angles. He didn't kill them, he disabled them, using brutal but non-lethal force, broken limbs, concussions, knockouts. He systematically took down Hammer's men one by one, turning their pursuit into a terrifying ordeal. Panic began to set in among the vultures. The darkness, the unfamiliar space, the feeling of being hunted by an unseen enemy, it unnerved them. They started firing wildly into the shadows, their shots echoing deafeningly in the confined space. Hammer's rage turned to fear, then back to rage. He found Silas finally, silhouetted against a broken window high up on a walkway. "You!" Hammer screamed, raising his pistol. Silas dropped from the walkway, not down, but sideways, swinging on a rusty chain he had noted earlier, landing on a platform below with the agility of a man half his age. Hammer scrambled down a set of metal stairs, leaving his last remaining men to fend for themselves. He wanted Silas, and he wanted him dead. They met on the main floor, in a large, open space dominated by a long-abandoned assembly line. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of decay. Hammer was breathing heavily, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Silas was composed, his movements economical, his breathing even. "It's just you and me now, old man," Hammer snarled, leveling his pistol. "It always was," Silas replied. Hammer fired. The shot ripped through the air, smashing into a concrete pillar near Silas. Silas didn't dodge, he flowed, a sudden, precise movement that took him offline from the shot. Before Hammer could fire again, Silas closed the distance. He didn't charge head-on. He used the scattered machinery for cover, moving in a zigzag pattern, low to the ground. Hammer fired again, 2 shots missing wildly as Silas closed the gap. When Silas was upon him, it was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He deflected Hammer's gun arm with a forearm strike, the impact jarring the pistol from the biker's hand. Then, a rapid series of strikes, a palm heel to the chin, a knee to the solar plexus, a sharp elbow to the temple. Hammer staggered back, disoriented, the fight draining out of him. Silas didn't stop. He followed up, trapping Hammer against a large piece of machinery. He didn't beat him senselessly. He used focused, disabling strikes, a blow to the collarbone, a sharp impact to the knee, a final, precise strike behind the ear that dropped Hammer to the ground, stunned and broken, but alive. Silas stood over him, breathing normally now. Hammer lay on the ground, whimpering, his aura of menace completely shattered. He was just a cruel, pathetic bully who had finally met someone stronger, someone who fought with purpose, not just brutality. "This town," Silas said, his voice low and final, looking down at the defeated gang leader, "isn't yours. You didn't earn it." Outside the mill, the sound of sirens grew louder. Deputy Miller and his increased force, along with officers from neighboring jurisdictions who had been alerted, were moving in, rounding up the remaining vultures who had been incapacitated or disoriented by Silas and his allies. Mara, Daniel, Ben, and Marcus emerged from their positions, ensuring the area was secure and assisting the deputies. Agent Carter and Agent Davies arrived at the mill yard, observing the scene. They exchanged a look with Silas. No words were needed. They knew he had handled it. The immediate aftermath was a scene of controlled chaos. Sirens wailed, flashing lights illuminated the industrial area. Deputies moved through the mill, finding the stunned and injured vultures, securing them. Silas, standing over Hammer, handed him over to Deputy Miller. "He's yours, Sheriff," Silas said, using Miller's proper title, a quiet acknowledgement of the man's courage and integrity. Deputy Miller looked at Hammer, then at Silas, a mix of awe and profound relief on his face. "Thank you, Silas," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." The news spread quickly through Oakhaven. The Iron Vultures were broken. Their leaders captured, their members arrested or scattered. The fear that had gripped the town for weeks began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of relief and tentative celebration. Silas and his allies didn't linger in the spotlight. As the cleanup began, they quietly faded into the background, assisting where needed but avoiding drawing attention to themselves. Agent Carter and Agent Davies oversaw the processing of Hammer and his lieutenants, ensuring they would face federal charges for the full scope of their crimes. Later, back at the Gas and Go, Silas and his small team gathered. They were tired, bruised, but victorious. The apartment above the garage, so often a place of quiet solitude, was filled with a comfortable camaraderie. "Well done, Silas," Marcus said, clapping him gently on the shoulder. "Just like the old days." Silas nodded. "Too much like the old days," he murmured. He looked out the window at the street below, lights coming back on in houses, people venturing out, a sense of normalcy, fragile but real, beginning to return. "This town owes you everything," Mara said softly. "They don't owe me anything," Silas replied. "They fought for themselves. They showed courage when it mattered." The conversation turned to the future. The team wouldn't stay. Their mission was accomplished. Oakhaven was safe. Mara would return to her life, Daniel to his welding, Ben to his bird watching, Clara to her tech world, Marcus to wherever it was he found peace. Silas knew his own peace had been disrupted. He couldn't go back to being just the quiet old man at the gas station, not entirely. The town knew glimpses of what he was, what he had done. Deputy Miller knew. Agent Carter knew. But perhaps that wasn't a bad thing. He hadn't sought this fight, but he hadn't shied away from it either. He had used the skills he had desperately tried to leave behind to protect the place that had given him refuge. He had shown that strength wasn't always loud or arrogant, and that courage could be found in the most unexpected places, even in a quiet old man with grease under his fingernails. The moral of the story wasn't just about defeating bullies. It was about the true meaning of respect, not something taken by force, but something earned through action, through standing up for what is right, through protecting the vulnerable. It was about how unity, even among disparate individuals, could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. It was about the dormant strength that lay within individuals and communities, waiting for a reason to awaken. In the days and weeks that followed, Oakhaven began to heal. The damage the vultures had inflicted was repaired, the physical scars slowly fading. But the deeper change was in the town's spirit. The fear was gone. The people were more connected, more determined to look out for one another. The gas station, once just a place to fill up, became a symbol of resistance, a place where courage had faced down tyranny. Silas continued to run his station. He still pumped gas, still fixed engines, still wore his faded cap. He was still quiet. But now, there was a difference. When people came to the station, they looked at him differently. There was respect in their eyes, gratitude in their voices. They didn't just see the old man, they saw the protector, the unexpected hero who had saved their town. He found a new kind of peace in that. It wasn't the peace of being forgotten, but the peace of having fulfilled a duty, of having used his burdens to lighten the load of others. He had defended his quiet harbor, and in doing so, had made it stronger, and his place within it more profound. 1 year later, Oakhaven was thriving. New businesses had opened, the streets were vibrant again. Deputy Miller had been elected sheriff, bringing a new era of integrity to the office. The Iron Vultures were a cautionary tale, their power broken, their leaders serving long sentences thanks to the evidence gathered by Agent Carter and Davies, and the testimony of Silas and others. Silas's gas and go remained, a cornerstone of the community. His old pickup truck was still parked out back, still dented, still faded. But no one mocked it anymore. They knew, just as they knew about Silas, that appearances could be deceiving, and that true strength was often found where you least expected it. Silas had returned to his quiet life, but it was a quiet life built on a foundation of earned respect and the enduring knowledge that he, and the town he called home, were capable of standing tall against any storm. Up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.